Hello everyone. I just wanted to do a quick video to explain why I'm not having the treatment that I was supposed to have. I'm going to start at the beginning, which is about a month and a half ago when I went to speak to the MS nurse at the Walton Centre, who talked me through everything and explained that it's really important that in the wake of treatment I isolate for a month, sort of seriously, and then 2 months kind of cautiously was the advice that was given. And at the time, I asked her what systems were in place at the Walton Centre around the idea of kind of keeping me safe from COVID whilst I was undergoing this immunosuppressive treatment. And she said there were a number of systems in place. There's different areas of the hospital that people are allowed to go, and everyone's got to wear masks, everyone's got to test and all that sort of stuff. When I arrived at the hospital yesterday, I was put into a side room, which is a room where it's just you on your own, and was told that the various protocols that had been in place had all been abandoned, basically because the government said COVID doesn't exist anymore. Effectively, the NHS Trust, or the Walton Centre Foundation Trust, as it happens to be, they've abandoned all COVID protocols in the hospital. So I was asked, that was kind of fine, but then the next minute I was moved from the side room onto a general ward with 3 other beds. And my wife had sort of said, I think passing comments about, obviously I won't be able to visit you. And somebody was like, no, you can visiting's back now, it's fine, you can visit whenever. So I asked the question about, if there's no COVID protocols in place and I'm not allowed to be in a side room, what guarantees have I got that I'm going to be safe while I'm undergoing this treatment that effectively wipes out my immune system? And they just sort of said, you'll be fine, don't worry about it. And that obviously to me wasn't a particularly good answer. And so I spoke to one of the nurses who was on the ward, who effectively said to me, the MS nurses don't know what they're talking about. They're never up here. They don't know what real life is like on the wards. And you just don't pay any attention to what they've said. To which I obviously was a bit like, well, hold on, they're the experts in this particular area in that sense. So eventually I spoke to the ward manager, and the ward manager said, the MS nurse shouldn't have told you need to isolate for 30 days. They shouldn't have told you this, shouldn't have told you that. They've obviously got you really worried about it. It's fine. We're just going to crack on. Don't worry about it. You can't have a side room. It's just not going to happen. So there's no point in even asking. You're not having one. And that was kind of, I just was a bit like, I'm not comfortable in this situation, because you're going to be giving me a treatment that wipes out my immune system in an environment where I'm offered no protection whatsoever. And nobody's given me a good explanation as to why that's the case. So I effectively said, look, I'd like to speak to one of the specialists, the MS nurses, and the doctor, and kind of talk through this with them. And they said, well, you're not going to be able to do that till tomorrow. So I left the hospital last night and went back in at 7:00 this morning and waited to speak to the relevant people. And when it got to about 2:10, something like that, I said to one of the people that was sort of coming around and checking how I was doing, I said, when am I going to speak to the nurses and the doctors? And they said, the doctors were here this morning. And I said, they absolutely were not, because I've been here very much waiting for the doctors since this morning and I haven't seen anybody. So they said, oh, leave it with me. And they disappeared off, and they spoke to the chief nurse that was looking after me, who apparently had a bit of a panicked look in her face and sort of said, oh, I don't know what's happening. And then about 10 minutes after that, a doctor came over who was I think the on-call doctor, so not a specialist, but the on-call doctor, who came over to speak to me. And he basically said, we can't offer you any reassurance. Like, there's nothing we can tell you in terms of what would happen if you got COVID. You can't have a side room. I've spoken to the bed manager. She said you can't have a side room. So you're just on the open ward, but we've been given immunosuppressant drugs on an open ward for years, which is totally true. And I've been on an open ward for alemtuzumab in the past, so I do get that. But the problem is, COVID's still real, whether the clown in charge of the country thinks that or not. COVID is still a real thing, right? And so my problem, my concern is I'm being asked to dampen my immune system on an open ward with visitors coming and going freely. Like, as I was there, somebody was brought up from A&E and their wife was there with them. I don't know whether they'd been tested for COVID. I don't know whether they had COVID. I have no idea. There were people on the ward with, what I'm going to refer to as persistent chesty coughs. So I've got no clue what's going on there. And I sort of said, but I don't feel safe in this environment without being given any reassurance. Like, at what point does my immune system get dampened? Like, I was told to isolate before I went into the hospital. I was told I need to isolate for 30 days after I've left the hospital. But during my stay in the hospital, it's just a free-for-all. Anybody can come and go. No one's got any idea what they may or may not have. That doesn't seem right to me in an age of COVID where it still exists, right? Where it's still a thing. There was I saw before, there was something like 30,000 admissions to hospital last week. So it's still around. And now, it's much less, of course it is, but all I was asking for was some reassurance, okay? And I could not marry in my head the fact that I'd been asked to isolate before I went into the hospital, and I was going to be asked to isolate for 30 days after I'd left the hospital, but nobody could tell me why I wasn't being protected while I was actually in the hospital. Obviously, I am very much of the opinion that this is all to do with the cuts that the government has enforced on the NHS, which means that they're desperate for beds and they haven't got enough staff to cope with them, right? I don't blame anybody there for what's gone on. But I said, I just want reassurance that I'm not going to die, because I would literally not have an immune system and you're letting people wander onto the ward willy-nilly. Can you give me any reassurance whatsoever? And they couldn't. The junior doctor that I spoke to basically said, no, I can't tell you that. I can't tell you you're going to be okay. But you can't have a side room. So it's either have the treatment or don't. So at this stage, I've chosen not to have the treatment, and I'm waiting until I speak to my specialist and discuss it with him, because what kind of is a fly in the ointment over all this, if you like, is that when I originally spoke to him about having this treatment, it's the third round of alemtuzumab, and typically you only have 2 rounds of it, right? You have 1 round and then another round a year later. I was recommended to have a 3rd round because I had a relapse last September, which they wouldn't have expected that quickly on the back of having the alemtuzumab. So he basically said it had gone to the multidisciplinary panel, which is where all sorts of experts across the board on that topic discuss it. And half of the multidisciplinary panel said that I should have the alemtuzumab because I've had a relapse, so it's obviously not working. And the other half said, it's only 1 new lesion. It's doing its job, really. It's just a bit of bad luck that you happen to have a relapse from it, because really it's only 1 in 10 lesions that tend to actually give you physical symptoms. So in amongst all of this, there's the fact that actually the experts are split on whether I should have it or not. But my expert said to me, if you're going to have it, I'd have it sooner rather than later, which is why we are where we are. But I'm not willing to be a guinea pig, effectively. I am not willing to put myself at risk when I don't have any reassurance from the people that are in charge that I'm going to be okay. And that's where we're at. So I've left the hospital, and I'm waiting to hopefully have a conversation with my specialist tomorrow, where we can have a conversation and maybe rearrange for me to go into the hospital at another time. That's where we're at. So it's a bit long-winded, but I wanted to kind of offer an update, basically.